just not quite even as sure what physical therapy can offer them. And so his company has really been trying hard to educate and create some awareness and do things the right way. And they've been really kind of trying to grow and maximize that effect. So Jamal, using the fellowship as a vehicle, has kind of been working on a way to propose some changes and some suggestions and some ways that maybe his company can help with all those kind of pain points, if you will. So I'll kind of be quiet and let him take it from there, but we're excited, Jamal, to hear from you and your final project. So whenever you are ready, if you want to share your screen, and I will give you the floor.
Yeah. So Kyle kind of asked me to give a little information about myself, kind of where I came from and how I got to this point. I graduated in 2016 from Wheeling Jesuit University. I was familiar with the functional movement systems and the SFMA at that time because I'd gone through a clinical rotation, and my instructor at that time was certified, and I learned the top tier and kind of how to utilize it. By the time I graduated, I was using it, but it was kind of in a half-assed manner. I didn't really know how to implement it or really apply the principles of it. And so I think I was really lacking at that time. But coming right out of school, you're getting your feet underneath you. I had some other goals in mind. I wanted to get my CSCS, my OCS, and just some other certifications like dry needling. And I was doing functional capacity evaluation over those first couple years. Once I got really settled in, COVID happened, and then I took the liberty of taking some of the online courses that FMS was starting to implement. So I did SFM1, SFMA1, SFMA2, and about a year later, I did FMS1 and FMS2 in person. And at that point, it was when I really started to realize how much I was lacking in the whole movement model and the principles behind it. Um, and I was able to start correcting some of the missing points that were painful for me in my treatment. And that brings me to the fellowship. I got my OCS, my CSS, and I was doing the functional movement systems whole protocol, FMS and SFMA. And I just saw the fellowship online and seemed like a way to kind of round over the whole principles and really start implementing it full force. And so here I am. And that brings us to the presentation. So I work for a company called Grand River Health. We're a health district, and I want to talk about how we can maybe improve the traditional sense of what therapy is to a new model of movement medicine. And I want to talk a little bit first about kind of the perspective of this presentation and how I'm presenting it to you currently, but how you guys should really look at it as if I'm presenting it maybe to the board of our hospital, the admin of our hospital, my boss, finance, that type of thing. And if you don't know what a health district is, it's kind of like the fire district. And so, where part of your taxes pay for a certain service in the community. And so, at this health district, the community is allowed to vote on the elections of the board members. We can vote on certain proposals like bond expansions, which we're going to talk about today. But the board will hire and oversee the administration. The administration oversees the day to day runnings of the hospital. But in this certain scenario, we ran out of space in our rehab department, and so we put a proposal to extend a bond, which would give us access to funds to hopefully build a new, not a new department, but a new building for Grand River Health. And that proposal ultimately passed in November. And so we're currently looking at expanding our footprint with a new building. It's going to be 3 stories, 2 of which will be for rehab across 3 disciplines. And I think that gives us some really good access to implement some new strategies for the world of rehab, particularly orthopedic therapy, because that's what I'm representing, and implement some new services, maybe some wellness and preventative, and some new technologies. I want to talk a little bit about the community we serve. It's a rather large area, nearly 2,300 square miles. That's almost the size of the state of Delaware. It serves 61,000 residents based on the census of 2020, and that's the state of, or in the county of Garfield County, in the state of Colorado. 61% of that population is of working age, so 18 to 65. It's a little less in the town of Rifle, which is where the hospital is located, because we have a greater volume of people under the age of 18, but that gives us more access to younger and hopefully physically fit individuals to really educate and prevent long-term breakdown of healthy habits and really implement some good wellness strategies. And with that being said, only about 18% report being physically active, again, across the whole county. 14% of that population is uninsured. That's a little above national average at 8%. In the town of Rifle, it's even more than that, around 20%. And so that's a pretty big barrier. When we talk about education, about 89% has a high school education level, and 33% go on to get some higher level, like a bachelor's. And so, what are some common pitfalls that we have of traditional therapy? There's a lot of barriers to it. Some of that is poor home program compliance. Some of that's due to the motivation of the patient. Sometimes that's due to maybe poor dosing on the therapy side. I know that sometimes we get busy, we kind of lose sight sometimes, and it's hard when you get busy. But these are all things we can improve upon. Everyone deals with insurance denials. We're no different than that. We have a rather large no-show cancellation rate, which we're trying to deal with currently. National average is somewhere between 8 and 11 visits currently throughout a day, and we're averaging somewhere around 5.5 or 5.7, I think is what we were recently told last week. So below average, we're trying to bring that up. Obviously, the cost is always a barrier, cost of the therapy, co-pays, but also the cost of getting to therapy. And then access to home equipment, access to independent program, or maybe something like a gym. These are relatively easy fixes. And so, how do we go from traditional therapy to movement medicine? We're doctors of physical therapy, we're doctors of movement medicine. We prescribe exercise as medicine. These are the principles we know and understand. And I want us to really kind of take our scope of practice to the next level. I want us to really work at the top of our license with doing things like direct access. And then we're not just a post-injury type of service, and we can do a longitudinal model of care and shift from reactive care and rehab and injuries to this primary prevention where you're coming to us for movement screening and wellness checks to make sure the breakdown doesn't happen over time and that you're doing things appropriately and lifting appropriately and doing your ADLs appropriately, and do things like athlete performance and make sure those weekend warriors are nice and safe. And it's just a good time to really educate patients that we're more than just someone that the primary care physician sends to us for an injury. They can come to us independently for an evaluation. And just some disclosures, I'm a fellow of the FMS, that's why I'm here. And I own a tonal, which we'll be talking about later in this presentation. Let's talk a little bit about what the traditional model of PT is. I say traditional because I feel like this is the older model of how physical therapy was presented in a healthcare model where you had a referral and you went to PT and you did your plan of care. And you would get to this metaphoric waterfall, and it's the metaphoric death of a patient where they go to discharge. And this can be a good thing where they finish their plan of care and they do all the right things and they're very successful. Sometimes they're not so much successful. They have no shows and cancellations. There's a lot of barriers to coming, and maybe they just kind of fall off. And so where do they go? They usually kind of cycle back through the entire system and come back for the same problems. And I think this is a point where we can really improve upon. So if you go upstream and look at how the patient gets to us, they typically go to their primary care for any given problem. Maybe they have a musculoskeletal issue and they end up getting referred to us. And they'll go through this traditional model of PT and have an evaluation. A plan of care will be established. They'll get anywhere between, I don't know, 6, 8, 10, 12 visits. If everything goes right, maybe they get better in that time frame, and that's awesome. But maybe they don't. And maybe we have these issues like the no shows and the cancellations, and then they have the discharge. And I think this is the old way of looking at it. I think it's a time to change. There's new technology out there, there's new models of thinking, and it's something that we can easily implement. So, how do we improve this landscape? And I think we can do it with this new model of movement medicine. And looking at this, it's pretty cumbersome, but we're going to break it down. But I want to start back at the top there at the traditional model of therapy. And so, if we can really start minimizing the amount of referrals we get and really ramp up the amount of direct access we can get, we'll start getting this revenue of patients that want to come see us. They know about us, they know what we do, we know that we can help. And that's much different than them being told to come see us by some other doctor. I pulled this out of the community, and this certain individual, they went to the ER, they had an injury, they didn't get a referral to follow up with any kind of therapy, and so they were reaching out to the community. And so when I spoke to her, she's like, I don't have insurance. She didn't have access to anywhere. She didn't really know how to go about it. So she ended up Googling it and discovered direct access as a thing. This is great, that she knows about it now, but this shouldn't be something that they have to go look for. It should just be known, and very accessible that they can come see us without a referral, and restricting some of those barriers for uninsured patients where they don't want to go pay a copay at a primary care just to get a referral to come see a therapist, which is where they need to be in the first place. Um, so I think this just comes with education and maybe changing some policies and just overall improving this model of care. When they get to the discharge, a discharge shouldn't really happen. Hopefully, they have a very successful plan of care. They get to the point where they're finishing up with therapy, and then they kind of fall into this pool of water and hopefully flow downstream into some sort of wellness. But we have barriers to that. There's time, there's money, and there's access. And I could argue that time's not necessarily a barrier. We all have the same amount of time, same 24 hours. It's just how we want to utilize that. Money is a different issue. We all have what we have, and we got to make that work for what we need. So we'll kind of talk about some workarounds for that. But access is something we can definitely improve with things like direct access, improving a facility like we're about to do, and just giving somewhere for someone to go, whether that's one-on-one care, or maybe something more independently, which is something I'm also going to propose here in this presentation. But if we can eliminate those barriers, or at the very least reduce some of those barriers, then we can really implement this strategy of wellness and preventative medicine. And there are different avenues to get into this lazy river of wellness and preventative. We can come the traditional model that I just showed you, through PT, and they can cycle in. They can get to us via an annual physical. These patients are going to biannual or annual physicals. They're having all other kinds of biomarkers of health. They're doing their vitals and their blood work. Maybe they're doing some imaging, but nothing really for movement unless there's a known problem. And so if we can augment that primary care visit with some sort of movement screening, maybe we reduce some of the issues down the road with pain and problems and lifting mechanics. That's a very easy fix in the beginning, but it becomes a very hard battle down the road when it's painful. Another avenue is just, I don't hurt. They don't have any known problems. They just want to feel better doing something. And I think that's a great avenue for someone to come direct access to us. Normally, we'll find something wrong, a compensatory movement. Maybe we'll make them do something that is painful and it shouldn't be. There's something that we can usually find to work on outside of them just wanting to be better. But it's easier to do it up front in the beginning before it becomes a known problem to them. And once they're in the circle, they stay in the circle. And this is the circle of life. This is longevity and preventative medicine. And this is kind of what we want to see as healthcare providers. They should really only leave this circle. One, if they want to have some very sport specific programming, we got to do that for them. Otherwise, if there's pain, problems, or barriers, they'll flow back upstream into the model of PT, and then flow back downstream back into that circle and kind of live out there. Implementing something like this, I think will take some change. And the first thing I want to talk about is just choice of provider. The model of how you choose a primary care is very different than the PT model. And so if you move to a new area, or you're trying to find a new provider, typically you can go to a website, you can search these primary care or these orthopedic specialists or any other kind of specialist. You can get their background and their training and maybe how they treat, and some reviews on these people. And then that patient can make a very informed choice about the type of care, the type of person they're going to see. On the PT side, it's not that at all, right? They go see their primary care. They have a problem. They get referred to have this body part seen, and it's an eval and treat. They don't know anything about the provider. We just call them and put them on the first available, um, and then they show up meeting us the first day. And I think this can be greatly improved upon. It's a simple fix where you create a website and put all our profiles in there and kind of highlight how we train and what we do and our education and our background. And This provides an avenue for that patient to really make an informed choice about the type of care that they want, and kind of what therapy as a whole can provide. We live in a world where patients are not really understanding that we're doctorate level health professionals. There's a huge disconnect there. I get a conversation probably at least once every couple weeks where I'm needling them and they're asking me how long I've been doing this for, and I'll tell them 10 years. They'll ask, well, what kind of training? And so I went to school for 7 years, and then it's an additional course. And they say, 7 years, you could be a doctor. And I said, well, I am. It's just they have no understanding of that. And so if we can really blow this up and really present all the type of training that we all have, because we come from different models of education and different backgrounds and different ways we can and treat different types of people, it's going to provide a better experience for that patient. It's going to build rapport and really give them an avenue of hopefully better care. And from an evaluation standpoint, I think we can improve many different ways. I think we can use something like an SFMA and form a common language, one between providers, but also on different spectrums of the health and fitness side. So you have the SFMA on the rehab side and an FMS on the wellness side. It speaks a common language between both sides for the provider, and it allows for a good continuum of care. But when you look at the model of something like an SFMA, it's no different than what we all know. It becomes very important in a direct access model to be very thorough, and the SFMA provides a standard operating procedure for us to have a checklist to make sure we don't miss something. And that becomes very important when someone's coming to us as the first point of contact of care. We have to be aware and on our shit that we can't miss something. We have to be aware of red flags and top of all the other things we look at, motion and compensatory movements and weakness and neurological defects. The SFMA provides that checklist, so hopefully you don't miss those things. And the last point I want to talk about is how we can leverage some tech and some data for visualization for the patients and for us to be better providers, to be data driven and objective. But there's a time and a cost barrier for us. Is the time of doing this and implementing it and learning it going to make us more efficient? And is the cost of that worth it? And so let's talk about a tonal. And if you're not familiar with what a tonal is, it's kind of like the Peloton of resistance training. It's a smart device. It's not very big. It hangs on your wall. It's a 7x7 area that you need to use it. And it can provide up to 250 pounds of resistance. It's slightly expensive. It's 5 grand per unit, and that it requires a membership to get the smart features of that, which will allow for eccentric loading and chain loading and all your other strength training benefits. But it also provides a spotter for someone that's training, where they don't need someone one on one making sure that they're not going to crush themselves under the weight. There's, I think, a good price for that type of safety. And something like that, where a patient becomes independent, we can get them off our schedule and improve access to our schedule that way, and that patient can kind of go on their own more independently. So I think there's some benefit to the cost of doing something like this, and I'm proposing that we do a tonal on the rehab side and at least one tonal on the wellness side, so we can implement something like that as a strategy to improve access and improve revenue. But I think a big question will be, how do we recoup some of the loss of the expense of these machines? How do we bill for it? And on the rehab side, I think you're not really going to have that type of solution. I think we will bill a typical eval, we'll go through our plan of care, and then towards the end of that plan of care, where they're really focusing on strength and they're kind of out of pain and they're moving better, then you can start training them on the tonal, and we can build things like 97550, where we're starting to get really data driven, and we can provide that in the MR for reimbursement. And it usually reimburses higher than our traditional CPT codes, but that's a way to recoup the loss. But when you look at the new building and what we're trying to achieve here, I would consider it a sunk cost, because we're going to be buying some machines to put in this place anyway. On the wellness side, I think there are many ways that we can kind of quote unquote sell a type of wellness situation here. Many people in our community are going somewhere. They're going to Anytime Fitness, they're going to Rocky Mountain Fit, CrossFit, and those all also have a price. and that price can be very steep. CrossFit's somewhere between $200 and $300 a month sometimes. So they're already going somewhere. Anytime Fitness right next to the Commons building, it's always crowded. And so if we can create a space for these people to come, that they stay within our system, it creates a reoccurring revenue for us. Um, the benefit for the patient is they get very specific access to care, and it's individualized to them, and it's progressible, and it's dosed according to their evaluation and their assessments. And they don't have to compete for time or machine. It's just their slot. They get access to that machine for that allotted time, and then they can perform their program. So it really opens up access for that patient. And I think there are different ways to look at return on investment. Obviously, a lot of the people presenting in this too will be looking at the financial aspect of it, but it creates a reoccurring revenue stream on the wellness side. People that would be discharging and going somewhere else. We have employees that go work out somewhere else. Well, now we're keeping them within Grand River and hopefully having a better value because they're being seen and being progressed by a healthcare professional. And it'll reduce dependency on insurance reimbursement. When you look at the clinical return on investment, I think there are many benefits to this. We can have improved adherence. There's going to be objective data that can be seen and tracked both on the patient side through an app that correlates with the tunnel, but also on the clinic side where we can see what they're doing and change the parameters and change how they dose and exercise based on the assessments that they're doing or maybe their goals. So there's huge advantage to that. And this is what it would look like on the provider side. We can see how much change happens or percent change from session to session. We can see how much asymmetry there is left to right. We can see how much weight they're doing and how that dose progressed over time or within that session or set to set. And I think there's huge advantages to that. The patient will see it on their app that they're slowly seeing change over time. For us, we can just copy and paste this to an EMR and synthesize that data more easily and more efficiently, and hopefully get reimbursement more effectively that way. And when we look at a community return on investment, it really positions the PT as the movement expert. It positions our direct access identity that patients will want to come see us because we know what we're talking about. We have this level of education. We have all these tools to objectively measure someone and present it in a meaningful way that they can see and understand. And it bridges that gap between healthcare and fitness where it's all in one facility. They don't have to come to PT for an injury and then go somewhere else once they're discharged and try to maintain. It's in house. We can provide that access to them. And ultimately, it encourages a preventative care culture. Don't wait for something to become a painful problem where you're just now broken down and it's going to take several weeks to correct the pain and then correct the movement and then build your strength. It takes forever to create a strength adaptation, and it's just easier to prevent it from happening in the beginning. And if we look at the evaluation aspect of how we can utilize tech, there are many things emerging in this world. We have AI, we have LiDAR sensing. We have things on the surgical side, like a Da Vinci robot and a Mako robot that make life easier. And I feel like in the world of PT, it's just kind of always been the same. I've been practicing for 10 years and nothing's really changed. And I've been in PT as a teen and as an adult. It's always been the same. And so why aren't we utilizing some of these things that we have access to? And it's so handy, like an app that uses LiDAR scanning to track motion and objectively measure that. So it's called Kinetisense. It requires a LiDAR based iPhone or iPad Pro. We can tell them to move and it can measure multiple joints. And this is way faster and more objective and um, less burden on us that we don't have to get a goniometer and measure the internal rotation of the tibia and the internal rotation of the hip and the thoracic rotation. We can capture it all in one motion and really speed up um, the evaluation and still maintain the integrity of the evaluation with the objective measures. So these are some examples of those reports. There are different objective measures or objective testing within the app, and you can do gait analysis and balance tests, and it's really no different than what we can already provide manually. It just prevents the data rich information that makes it more meaningful for a patient. They can see where they're deficit and they can see how they compare against other norms. And for us, we can take all this information and just copy and paste it into an EMR. It doesn't replace our clinical reasoning, it just augments it. It's not going to tell us what's wrong with them, but we now have that data. It was a faster way of getting it, and we can synthesize it. But I think where something like this really shines is when you're trying to push volume and the burnout rate's high and a patient or a provider's tired at the end of the day, this system doesn't get tired, it doesn't get rushed, it's not distracted, it's not biased. And so at the end of a long day and you have to do an eval, you can go through this probably pretty fast and still probably pretty effectively and just leave it and maybe pick it up the next day and that data will still be there. You can see how they move and then at that point when you're fresh, you can do your clinical reasoning more effectively. Um, and maybe allow for better one-on-one time because you're not worrying about having to type your documentation. But there's a cost to that. The cost for this app is $249 a month for 2 years. It's subscription based and it requires a device, an iPad Pro. Um, so there's a cost to maybe some efficiency and some reduction in burden. And I would argue that's worth it. But when you look at something that costs $249 a month, it's hard to quantify that objectively because what can this do that's different than what we can do manually? And nothing really. You could whip out a goniometer and measure all those things, but it's cumbersome. There are things like standard of error of estimate and inter-rater and inter-rater reliability. And if we can all use the same tool and it's more effective and it's more accurate and there's less reliability issues, then why wouldn't we use something like that? And when you look at something like a Da Vinci robot, which we just purchased, it can cost somewhere up to $2.5 million. There's an annual maintenance cost to that, somewhere upwards of $100,000 on average per case, $1,000 to $4,000 more over a laparoscopic or open procedure. So there's a cost to using the system, and that cost is maybe slightly higher than what we're used to doing, but it's the standard of care. It's what our surgeons are training on, and we said if we build it, they will come. And hopefully that improves patient outcomes, and hopefully that reduces the surgeon's burden and it makes their life easier and that improves satisfaction across both the patient and the provider. Um, but I think there's a cost to that, and maybe it'll slightly reduce some profit margins. But is that cost worth it? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I think that's something to think about. And when you compare that to the world of therapy, therapy's been relatively stagnant. The whole healthcare model is constantly evolving and changing, and we're trying to do best practices. Um, and now we have these tools that are relatively consumer friendly in terms of purchasing, that they're relatively cheap, like a LiDAR tracking system, which I mean, that was never available. Now it's something we can have. And so we can be the forefront of this kind of emerging tech. Um, and I think there's going to be a huge benefit to that. But if we can take these new tools and we can implement it into this new model of movement medicine and wellness and preventative, we can be more effective in the way that we treat people. We can be more data objective and we can have better outcomes because we can track it more effectively and more efficiently without burden. And these annual physicals and these wellness examinations, they'll start using something like a LiDAR tracking app or an FMS and be able to provide a better program based on that. And then the programming can be more of a periodization model. Not that everyone needs that, but it's going to be cyclical. There's got to be a way to appropriately dose these things to create adaptation. And if you don't dose the medicine appropriately, if you don't dose that exercise appropriately, the adaptation is very slow, if at all, to happen. And I think that's very important to start implementing that on the wellness side. And so you can look at hypertrophy pretty granularly in strength and active recovery and muscular endurance. And you can really create um, this purposeful way of training somebody. When you look back at those barriers, I'm still going to argue that time is the same for everybody. We all have the same 24 hours. So you just got to utilize it. But now you can argue like you finished your plan. You were coming to see me once a week, twice a week for this time period. Like you just got to keep that habit up and maintain that and keep coming here. And we're providing you with a way to do that with access to a facility, access to a machine that will will still be overseeing it, but it'll independently allow you to progress and you'll have some autonomy in your care. And you can see the changes that are happening because we're tracking that and it's very visual for you. So the access will now be there. But money is always the tough sell. Is this going to be worth the cost for the patient? And you can argue about the copays. They're already coming to see us and they're paying for it. And I would say like $100 is going to be relatively cheaper for you to come here and do these things that I'm telling you to do. You just got to do them. I don't need to hold your hand, and it'll be more cost effective for you. $100 a month versus $50 every session. So education will go a long way on this, but we can do things like insurance discount. We do that already at Grand River, and we send those people and that money away to another facility. But you can keep that in house and really recoup some of that reoccurring revenue. But we can also do things like gyms do. We can do giveaways and grants and promotions, and it'll be a weird transition. But um, I think it's better to keep it in house and really promote a preventative culture and provide this access that people have somewhere to go and we're the people that they want to see. And I think that's very important. I think it's a very attainable goal, and it just is going to require some adjustments and some education, but something we can do. So I'll leave you with this quote, something I found while looking up some diagnoses a while back, but it really resonated with me. And I think no matter how much we try to change and evolve the healthcare model, humans are always humans. And so there's always something that is going to affect one person over another. And I think this quote was very impactful. Um, but we're always going to try our best and try to keep the thing in the air. So I'll give you a moment to kind of read over this. And if you have questions, I'm here for it.
Awesome. Nice job, Jamal. I how did you land on like wanting kineticence and tonal as kind of like your solution to some of the like some of the problems that you talked about, like drop off and things like that?
Yeah, I think just at baseline, I'm kind of a tech forward guy. Like I'm always that guy that wants the like newest thing, and even it's
Hmm.
stupid for me to purchase. So that's a pro and a con. And so when the I had worked with a markerless movement system a couple years ago in a clinic. It was a personal trainer that had bought it, and he was running it. And he hired me as the physical therapist in this gym, but he was the one doing all that. And I was like, this just kind of seems backwards to me. Like I feel like I should be part of that, but that was my first exposure to it. So I was like, oh, wow, this is really becoming mainstream. And then I got the email with FMS that Kineticence was kind of going out. So I met with a PT that is part of that company. And so we were talking about it. I have an LLC that I was like considering maybe just kind of going off and doing my own thing, but there's an expense to that, right? 250 a month, and I don't really see that quantity of patient yet. So I couldn't justify it. But who's to say that I will be here my entire life? And so the community could still benefit from something like that. And the hospital gets the revenue stream. So it's something that they could totally implement with or without me. And I think it would be a good
Hmm.
tool. But I think it's a good way to kind of really create objective data
Hmm.
versus us just measuring it with a goniometer. That answer your full question? I think there was a second part to
Yeah,
that.
yeah, definitely. And then just a small question. I have a question about the billing code. So
Yes.
I think you would put like 97550. If I, is that for caregivers? Am I looking at the wrong thing? I'm just interested. I'm always interested in different ways for billing and stuff. So I didn't know that code.
Oh, hang on.
Um,
97750. Hang on.
oh, did I put it in wrong?
No,
I think it was like it was like the second one. So there was like the first one
nine,
was like therapy exercise, and then there was one
yeah,
under it.
97750. It's physical performance
Oh,
tests and measures.
okay, yeah,
Um,
okay.
you've used that?
I did, but I'm in Indiana, and we don't get great reimbursement for that. I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know what it is for you guys. I think it was like $11 for us, so I stopped
Oh,
billing that quickly.
okay. I used it in West Virginia, rural West Virginia, and we used it typically for like a return to work,
Mm.
work conditioning. And
Yeah,
man, it reimbursed like a crazy amount, like I think $120 a unit or something like that.
yeah. That's what I was hoping because I used it for like FMS and Y balance and stuff like that for a little while, and then got told that it was not worth it.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. I should look more into what maybe Colorado will reimburse because maybe it's not that good. And I just assumed it was. But I think you're right. I
Yep.
think I had the code in there wrong. I think I had the first one that you said. So I'll have to change that.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Really nice job, Jamal. Love the slides. They keep getting better every single time I see them. So this is probably the third time now that AJ and I have uh, seen his presentation, and I can tell you that the slideshows and the graphics and the engagement continues to get really refined and even better and better. So great job. Um, so obviously the context with this is that, you're trying to make a change, right? You're trying to pitch something to the board of directors, the powers that be, the people that are, that are making this expansion and are going to be growing this practice, and you want this to obviously be a pillar or part of it. So I think your pitch does a really good job of creating the problem and the why and addressing some of the common pain points. Um, but just like reality, I guess, is that a lot of times progress is a lot slower than we like it to be, right? So I guess maybe could we go through the exercise of um, let's pretend that yes, they are willing to um, open up the floor for some innovative ideas, but maybe it's not a tonal and maybe it's not kinetic. Like, is there a kind of maybe a plan B as opposed to saying, well, okay, if we can't do tonal, we can't do kinetic, then this is just dead in the water. Like, we want to, maybe there's a compromise to get it like version one is this, and then later on down the road, version two has tonal and kinetic. So maybe walk us through maybe what would be a backup plan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I already do the dumb method, right? The non-smart version with Excel spreadsheets. So data tracking, like I have a return to sports Excel spreadsheet, and it runs equations in the background. Like you literally just have to plug in your data and hit submit, and it'll run the equations. So we have that data tracking available, but it's still very manual. But we can do training so everybody can kind of implement that because I'm really the only one doing it right now. And I don't know if that's because they don't have access to something like that. They don't want to do equations by hand. I've never really asked, so maybe that's on me. Um, so we could certainly implement that for data tracking. But we can do that across strength training too. We can open this model of care with or without a tonal. We have the equipment for most people. There's some of my high schoolers that need at least a squat rack, which we don't have because they're doing heavier loads than what I can provide for them. But that's an easy fix and a cheaper fix than a tunnel. But just teaching the community and these athletes and just the general population the principles of exercise, like why it's important, why you should do a certain amount of weight for a certain dose for a certain therapeutic effect. Like there's every day I have a conversation when my patients show up about uh why 3 sets of 10 is different than 1 set of 30. But for their entire life, they've gone to the gym and they've done 50 of something in a row, and that's just what they know. They don't know why they're doing it. So I think that's an easy implementation. I think there's just a better data-driven way to do it at a certain cost, but I think that'll reduce the burden on us. So it's not so much thinking.
Yeah, no, that's good. I know, I appreciate that. I mean, obviously, I think I'm always a firm believer in let's start with what ideal is, and then if they are like, well, we just can't do this or this, instead of it just being like, well, we tried, throw up our hands and walk away. It's like, okay, well, we can implement this phase and this phase, and if we get that up and running, then maybe we can do this in the next 3 years. And I think it's it would be a good way to kind of almost negotiate and compromise if they're not willing just to, you know, go all in on everything right out of the gate, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. I think just a
yeah,
good thing, a good exercise to be thinking about.
for
So.
sure.
Hey Jamal, nice job. How do you foresee, or what is your plan of attack from like a wellness assessment to the tonal? Like, what does that process kind of look like?
Yeah, I thought about that. And I had a feeling you were going to ask me that because when you and I met alone, you said, how do you incorporate the FMS into this model? And so
Yeah,
I've been searching through the tonal, like the app and the system. There's nothing that directly correlates like with the movement screen outside of like it's not going to use the machine, right? Like if you're going to do like a straight leg raise, sure, you could do like a hip extension with the cable, like you could set that up, but it's the camera's not going to assess you on that machine. So
yeah,
there's no way to like
yeah.
correlate those things. So you still have to do that manually, right? FMS
Okay.
for the kinetisense, and then probably still do it the standard way that we do, right? Like correct the movement problems. And then when they get to a point where they're like a two, then you can start loading those patterns asymmetrically or symmetrically.
So, is there a way for you to like maybe come up with a lot of different situations of like they have all twos but a one on squat? This is what we're gonna do here, like and adjust it, and then like you have basically templates to hit. I don't know how, because you're going to have lots of different combinations of things, but trying to come up with a flow basically based on how they move, what template they would get from the tonal, and then reassess at 6, 8 weeks later. And if they hit new criteria, then it updates to the next level or something like that from a exercise perspective. And I don't know if that's possible. I don't know how feasible that would be, but that's where my mind goes just because I feel like um, that can take a lot of mental work if you got 30 people a month where you're trying to look at how they did, and you don't remember how they did on their wellness, and you don't have time to look at all the Kineticent stuff. But if you get one print off from Kineticent, you get match it with a template of exercise. They're going to get this for these next 6 to 8 weeks. Then when we recheck, then if things are trending in a positive direction, they get this. If something regressed, we go to this, and like trying to find ways where you could um, basically have a standard process of where they go. And even if somebody stays with you for 10 years, like they don't need the same thing every 6 to 8 weeks. Like you want to switch it up,
Right.
and just having a standard way of like that will go from a double leg push to a single leg push, and then from a single leg pull to a double leg pull, and like trying to find different variations where it starts to stay engaging, I think is the other thing, which I'm sure the tonal can do a really good job on that. But
Yeah,
just trying to figure out how that process would work would, I think, be a interesting task.
I think so. I think you're right. I don't think I have a direct answer for you. I think
And yeah, it might just be playing with a lot of stuff.
correct. I think there'll be a trial era of this model where it's like, hey, we're going to take 10 volunteers. It's going to be free for you, and we're just going to
Yeah.
see what happens and get feedback.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I see it going.
Yeah. I think
But
that's a good idea.
I think long term, I think early on it's going to be like, hey, you're going to be here for an hour. Your first 30 minutes is going to be like your standard, FMS drills, right? Like improve the mobility, try to get these ones to a two, or zeros to a one, whatever it may be. Um, and they're probably going to be in PT if it's a zero, obviously. But once they're starting to correct and really load, then they'll maybe be on the tonal for the full hour. I don't know. I don't know really
Yeah.
what that would look like. We'll do some thinking.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where I think it'd be some stuff. Play with you, look at your FMS, then make a template on your own tonal at home, and do it 6, 8 weeks, and see what happens to your strength, and see what happens to your movement scores. Do we get stronger, but we lost mobility? How do I curve that? And obviously, it's an N of one, but like that gets you at least a starting point, and then you get to a case of 10 people, and you see what trends you start to see, and maybe there's a thing that you're like, I'm always seeing this. Like even if somebody doesn't have a 2 on active straight leg raise, if we do single leg RDLs, those people's straight leg raises are getting better. So that's
Right.
something, as long as we don't overdose it, we stay in a controlled range. Does that make a change? And yes, if it does, great. If it doesn't, then we know like, hey, we got to stick to the correctives before we start doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Jamal, quick question as far as, you gave some really great demographic information about your community. But you also mentioned some challenges in terms of them really having awareness of, what PTs do and when they should, pursue interaction with physical therapy. And it just kind of made me put on my public health hat. And one of the things that I frequently saw with a lot of different initiatives over the years was kind of the constant friction between more top down and bottom up approaches.
Mhm.
And the idea that in a lot of cases, like you build it and they'll come.
Sure. Yeah.
And it sounded like you have this amazing facility that's in the works for construction, some challenges with kind of awareness in the community. And, that high tech route certainly gives you a lot of like rich data, a lot of trackableness. Do you have input from the local community that that's what they're looking for is a really high tech approach and that they, would even be attracted to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, I don't have any concrete data. It's more just me like picking my own patient's brains as I'm treating them. So it's not very like evidence-based. But my patients, and maybe it's just the way that I treat, they're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. But I know it's not going to meet everybody's need. There's a lot of ranchers out here that could care less whether they see another doctor the rest of their life. So what are they going to care that they're 67% of thoracic rotation? I get that. And so I don't know what the common ground is for that. Like, do you even provide that for them as an option, or do you just kind of do like you're just normal FMS, or maybe a traditional eval and just say, yep, like this is where you are and these are your goals. I don't know what the answer to that is. Outside of doing like an actual like maybe countywide survey of like, would this be of any interest to you, so we can get some data on that, which is probably something we should do before we implement this. It's a good question.
Yeah, that could definitely add to for like when you're meeting with your superiors and stuff like that. Like, this is what people want. And then
Yeah.
if people want it, they're going to be more likely to say, yeah, I think.
And providers, right? Like I present it, and I'm one of the oldest providers here now. So there's a lot of younger people, and we're just kind of all bogged down by like the protocol, the policies and the protocols within the healthcare system. We feel like really restricted. Our EMR system is not very good, right? We're used to picking up a phone and it just kind of working and doing whatever we want, talking to it using AI, and you can't do that in our current system. And it's like, I'd almost quit at this point. That's how bad it is. And so when I'm looking at that point, like if we're all feeling that way, how much is that getting across the patient, that we're kind of like burnt out and just kind of overusing these systems? And if we can refine that and make it better for the patient or the provider, that might provide a better model for the patient just through that systematic effect, whether or not they see the tech on their side. So I think that's another avenue of benefit. But that's not everybody either. There are some people that are younger than me that could care less about using a phone nowadays. So I don't know. I'm a weird millennial.
Excellent job. Well, it's really good. Anyone else have any other questions or comments for Jamal? Well, Jamal, what's the next step? So I know that this is eventually this is going to hopefully be a proposal in front of some higher ups. What's the next step before we get to that point?
Yeah, we had a meeting last week about our no-show cancellation rate, trying to improve that. They're worried about building it so they will come, and then nobody's going to come because our numbers aren't very good right now. But I think that's a problem of like the access that we talked about and not kind of understanding what we do. So with that being said, last week I told them that I was done with my presentation, that I would actually be presenting it this week. So I recorded this. It's going to go to my boss and probably my coworkers as like a pre-screen. If the green lights from there, it'll probably go to the CMO. And then from there, probably the board. And it'll probably be me actually presenting it again versus just this recording, is how I picture it going, hopefully.
I love it. Well, great job. And certainly as things develop, even post, fellowship now, I think you have a really great vision and a really great plan that is real and something that that hopefully you can start making some steps towards improving not only, your business and your clinic, but helping the people in your community. I mean, that's ultimately we want all those wins to occur, and that's again why you're doing what you're doing. So, excellent job, fantastic work throughout your fellowship. I think I think that it's I think it's been an interesting journey. Just it was working with the population you work with, and your unique expertise, and kind of tailoring the movement model and everything to those demographics and those cases. So it's been challenging, but it's been a good kind of challenge. So something we can all learn from, and so we really appreciate everything you've contributed to our fellowship team.
Yeah, thank you. It's been good.
Awesome. So that's good. So all right. So Jamal will be a candidate for taking the final exam. He'll be able to do that over the next couple weeks to officially become a